Have you ever felt like the world just doesn't know what to do with you? Like you're speaking a language no one else understands, and every time you try to explain yourself, it's as if your words hit a wall, misinterpreted, dismissed, or worse, ignored altogether. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung. But what if I told you that becoming who you truly are starts with realizing you were never supposed to fit into their mold in the first place? Maybe the problem isn't that you're too intense, too quiet, too emotional, too analytical, too bold, too sensitive, too different. Maybe the real issue is that the world only knows how to handle what it already understands. And you? You were never meant to be understood by the average mind. There's a quiet kind of pain that comes from constantly being mislabeled, from hearing the same phrases echo in your head over and over. Why can't you just be normal? Stop overthinking. You're too much. You're too complicated. Eventually, you start to believe them. You wear those words like chains, and each time someone misunderstands you, it reinforces the lie that something is broken inside you. But deep down, a different voice whispers, a stubborn voice, a quiet rebellion that says, no, this isn't broken, this is different, and different isn't wrong. You've probably learned how to hide your sharpest edges. You've smiled when you wanted to scream. You've played small to make others comfortable. You've watered yourself down, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they'd accept the more palatable version of you. But they didn't. They still looked at you like you were a problem they couldn't quite solve, like no matter how small you made yourself, it still wasn't small enough to fit in their idea of acceptable. So you kept folding, again and again, shrinking into versions of yourself that barely resembled the person you once were. You thought that if you just bent a little more, they might finally meet you where you are. But all they did was take, and you, out of desperation, out of hope, out of that aching need to be loved, let them. Because deep down you thought their love had to be earned, that if you weren't being embraced, it must be your fault. Maybe you were too intense, too sensitive, too different, and instead of questioning why they couldn't love someone like you questioned why you were someone like this in the first place. That's the trap. When you're raised in a world that punishes difference with distance, you learn to blame your authenticity for the abandonment. You tell yourself that love is conditional, that in order to be accepted, you must first erase your edge, your fire, your wildness, your complexity, and slowly you become what they prefer. Predictable, soft around the edges. Easy to hold even if it means being hollow inside, but the cost of belonging in their world is disconnection from your own. You start waking up every day in a life that doesn't feel like it belongs to you. You say yes when you mean no. You laugh at things that don't feel funny. You nod along to conversations that bore you to death. Because being agreeable is safer than being real. Because being quiet is easier than being misunderstood. Until something inside you snaps. Not loudly, not violently, but with that quiet, unmistakable crack that tells you, this isn't sustainable. You can't keep betraying yourself to belong to people who wouldn't recognize your truth even if you screamed it in their faces. And you realize it's not that you're hard to love, it's that you've been offering your love to people incapable of holding it. People who can only digest watered-down versions of humanity. People who see depth as a threat. People who label emotion as weakness. You weren't too much. They were simply too little. Too limited in their capacity. Too shallow to swim in the oceans you carry within you. And now finally you stop blaming yourself. You stop apologizing for your intensity, for your sensitivity, for your mind that never stops asking why. You stop editing your voice just to be understood. Because you realize, those who are meant to hear you will feel you even in your silence. You weren't born to perform. You were born to be. Fully, unapologetically. Even if that means being misunderstood. Even if that means walking alone for a while. Because loneliness in your truth is still better than connection built on your erasure. You start reclaiming your space, not aggressively, but clearly. You begin to unlearn the guilt tied to self-preservation. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop justifying your needs. You stop seeking permission to be whole. And in that silence, in that sacred moment of choosing yourself over acceptance, You remember. This is what it feels like to come home. Not to a place, but to your own skin. Want me to continue with another few hundred words? Because no matter how much you bent yourself to fit in, something still felt off. That's because your difference was never the problem. Their expectations were. Most people are terrified of what they don't understand. They'd rather put you in a box than take the time to truly see you. So they give you a label, something easy, something familiar. And in doing so, they flatten you into a version that's easier to digest. They see one part of you, maybe your silence, your intensity, your unpredictability, and they use that sliver to define your whole identity. But you are not a sliver. You are a storm of contradictions, of layers, of truths too complex to sum up in a single word. You are allowed to be loud one day and withdrawn the next. You are allowed to crave connection and solitude in the same breath. You are allowed to be the full, unedited version of yourself, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Especially if it makes others uncomfortable. Because when you shrink yourself for the sake of being accepted, you don't just lose the parts they couldn't handle. You lose the parts that made you powerful. There's a reason you feel things so deeply. There's a reason your mind works the way it does, twisting, turning, questioning everything. There's a reason your energy doesn't always match the room. You were never designed to blend in. You were built to disturb the pattern, to disrupt the automatic, to challenge the script. But being different is heavy when no one tells you that your difference is sacred. You start to carry it like a curse. You start to believe that maybe, if you could just change this one thing about yourself, you'd finally be enough. You'd finally be understood. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Trying to be understood by the wrong people will destroy you. They don't see your depth because they were never meant to swim in it. They only skim the surface looking for reflections of themselves. And when they don't find it, they call you difficult, or cold, or unstable. They name you based on their own fear. But their fear was never yours to carry. It was never your job to translate yourself into their language. You were meant to speak your truth, fluently, unapologetically, even if no one around you understands it yet. And the moment you stop chasing their approval is the moment you start finding your power. Because there's something liberating about owning your difference. There's something defiant about saying, yes, I'm not like you, and I never wanted to be. When you stop apologizing for who you are, you begin to attract people who don't need an apology in the first place. People who speak your emotional dialect. People who feel like home, not because they understand every corner of your mind, but because they respect it. And you'll begin to notice something. The same things that made you feel like an outsider. They're the exact things that give you your edge, your overthinking. That's your analytical gift, your sensitivity. That's your intuition, screaming truths others can't hear. Your silence. That's your ability to listen, to observe, before speaking with purpose. The traits you were punished for growing up are the very traits that, once owned, can make you unstoppable. But only if you stop bearing them to make others comfortable. Only if you stop measuring your worth by how well you fit into their box. There's no prize for being digestible. There's only the slow death of self-abandonment, because every time you silence your difference, you tell your younger self that the world was right to shame you. You reinforce the lie that your uniqueness is a flaw. But what if instead you chose to protect that younger version of you? What if you chose to show them that they were never the problem? That the world just wasn't ready for someone like them? Because here's the truth they won't tell you. Greatness has always been misunderstood. People fear what doesn't follow the script. The rebels, the visionaries, the thinkers who saw differently, felt differently, lived differently. They were rejected before they were revered. Laughed at before they were listened to. But they didn't change who they were to gain acceptance. They embraced their difference, and in doing so, they changed the world. You don't need to change who you are. You need to reclaim it. Peel back the layers of shame, undo the programming, or let yourself be weird. Let yourself be wild. Let yourself be wonderfully, fearfully different. And when the world tells you you're broken, remember, it's easier for them to believe that than to admit they never learned how to handle someone like you. Because if you're the broken one, then they don't have to change. They don't have to stretch their empathy. They don't have to step outside their narrow view of what a person should be. They can stay in their comfort zone, safely judging what they don't understand instead of risking the discomfort of seeing the world differently. They label your chaos because it challenges their control. They diagnose your sadness because it unsettles their shallow joy. They call your depth a problem because it makes them feel shallow in comparison. But here's the thing. They were never qualified to measure your worth. They only saw fragments, snapshots of you through their cracked lens, and then they acted like they knew your whole story. But how could they? How could they possibly understand the kind of storms you've had to survive just to show up? How could they recognize your strength when they've never lived a day inside your silence? They only see the aftermath. They don't see the fire it took to keep going. They don't see the nights you begged the universe for some kind of answer, some kind of clarity, just something to hold on to while everything around you collapsed. And still you stood up the next day, still breathing, still trying, still carrying a heart they swore was broken, but somehow still beats with relentless honesty. No one tells you how much power there is in surviving without ever becoming what tried to break you. No one gives you credit for not numbing out, for not giving in, for still choosing to care in a world that punishes people who feel too much. Because when you're the kind of person who notices every shift in the room, who hears the weight behind someone's silence, who aches over things others don't even register, you're treated like a flaw in the system, an error in the script, a reminder of the things everyone else is trying so hard to forget. They don't see the quiet war you fight each morning just to keep showing up with an open heart, the internal tug-of-war between protecting your peace and honoring your depth, the exhausting effort it takes to filter through every emotion, every thought, every room, while still pretending like it doesn't overwhelm you. You've learned how to smile while drowning, how to nod while mentally screaming, how to be the anchor for others when you're barely holding yourself together, and yet, because you do it well, because you've gotten so good at it, they assume you're fine, they assume it's easy, they assume there's nothing to carry. But your stillness is not the absence of chaos. It's the result of years spent mastering how to hold chaos without letting it spill. They don't realize how many nights you've spent staring at the ceiling, replaying every word you said that day, analyzing every reaction, wondering if you were too much, too distant, too honest, too invisible. And even when you're met with silence, you still care, still question, still stay soft in a world that would rather you be indifferent. You've been punished for your honesty, for your intuition, for your refusal to become numb, and yet you keep choosing it. You keep choosing to listen when no one else does, not because it's easy or because it ever gets any easier, but because something in you refuses to let another voice go unheard, another soul go unseen. And even when your own ears are ringing with the silence they give you in return, you still lean in, still soften, still believe there's something worth saving in the echo of someone else's pain. You speak up when silence would shield you, when biting your tongue would earn you peace, but peace that tastes like surrender, peace that chokes you slow, so you speak not to be loud, but to be real, even when your voice shakes, even when they stare at you like you've lost your place in the script they wrote for you, because losing your place there is the only way you ever stood a chance at finding yourself. You reach out again and again with trembling hands that remember every time they were slapped away, rejected, ridiculed, left hanging in that cruel space between hope and humiliation, and yet you keep reaching, because the alternative is to close off, to shut down, to become like them, numb and guarded and safe, but never whole. You love with a heart that carries 1,000 quiet fractures, a heart that has been both battlefield and burial ground, and still it beats in rhythm with something sacred, something defiant, because you know that to love after being broken isn't foolish. It's the bravest act of rebellion there is. And when you do all of this, when you choose softness over survival, compassion over control, connection over convenience, they call it weakness, because they've never learned to see strength in vulnerability, because the armor they wear has made them blind to what real courage looks like. They don't understand that it takes more strength to feel everything than to feel nothing, more resilience to remain open in a world that rewards indifference, more bravery to continue caring when the cost of caring is rejection, betrayal, and sometimes even shame. They've built their identities on walls and distance and the illusion of power, mistaking detachment for superiority, thinking that if they stay cold enough, empty enough, untouchable enough, nothing will ever break them, and they won't have to face the terrifying truth that they are breakable too. But you walk through the fire without a mask, without pretending it doesn't burn, and still you choose to hold out your hand to others. Still you offer warmth when all they've given you is frost, and you don't do it because you're naive or weak or looking for validation, but because somewhere deep inside, you know that healing doesn't come from shutting down. It comes from staying open. You know that the world doesn't change when people hide their hearts. It changes when someone like you refuses to stop showing up with theirs. So no, you're not weak. You're a quiet revolution, a living contradiction to everything they said you had to be in order to survive. And your difference isn't a flaw to be erased, but a mirror that reflects back everything they've been too afraid to face in themselves. You've been called too much, too sensitive, too intense, too honest, too real, and every single "too" is just code for more than they could handle, more than they were willing to hold space for, more than they had language to understand. But that doesn't mean you change. That doesn't mean you shrink. That doesn't mean you start rewriting yourself in their language just to make them feel comfortable. You weren't made to fit their mold. You were made to break it. And if that means being misunderstood, being labeled, being dismissed, then let it happen, because better to be misunderstood in your truth than accepted in your disguise. Better to walk alone in your fullness than be surrounded in your fragmentation. Because at the end of the day, the world doesn't need more perfectly put together people. It needs the raw, the honest, the bleeding hearts who still choose to love, the trembling hands that still choose to reach, the shaking voices that still choose to speak, the tired eyes that still choose to see. And if that's you, if that's what you bring, then know this. They might call it weakness. But it's the kind of strength that saves lives, starts revolutions, and makes the world a little less dark. So don't stop. Don't change. And don't ever let anyone convince you that your softness isn't power. They call it fragility. They call it drama or sensitivity or instability, because it's easier to minimize you than to admit they could never endure what you've carried without breaking. You feel everything and they envy that. Because deep down they know they've spent their lives building armor so thick that nothing gets in. Not even joy, not even meaning, not even truth. And there you are, raw, unprotected, still willing to open yourself to life, even when it cuts. Even when it leaves scars. Even when it leaves you holding pieces of yourself you're not sure how to name, let alone explain. They don't see the strength it takes to rebuild yourself again and again in silence, to walk back into a world that constantly misreads you and still decide to give your best. They don't see that behind your overthinking is someone who just wants to get it right, who wants to be understood, who wants to protect everyone, even those who keep hurting you. And yes, it would be easier to shut it all off, to stop caring, to let the world turn cold and match its temperature. But that's not who you are. That's never been who you are. Even in your darkest moments, you still held on to something soft. Even when no one gave you permission to feel, you felt anyway. Even when love was taken for granted, you offered it anyway. And that refusal to go numb, is a kind of rebellion most people will never understand. Because in a world that celebrates detachment, your tenderness is radical, your empathy is loud, your truth is disruptive, and your difference is what keeps this world human. It's what reminds others, those who are willing to look, what it means to feel without filters, to exist without permission, to keep loving without guarantees. You are not broken for feeling too much. You are not weak for still caring. You are a living contradiction to everything they've been told strength is supposed to look like, and maybe that's why they don't know what to do with you. Because you're not a puzzle to solve. You're not a project to fix. You're a force that challenges the narrative. You make people question what they've silenced in themselves, what they've buried to survive, and that makes you powerful in a way they'll never be able to control. So let them misunderstand. Let them mislabel. Let them speak in fragments while you continue to live in full sentences. Because the ones who feel deeply are not lost. They are the map. The ones who break often are not weak. They are being remade. And the ones who choose to care over and over again, even when it hurts, they are the ones this world needs most. You've spent years learning how to shrink your light just enough to not blind them, but they never even opened their eyes. They made you think your sensitivity was a flaw, when in reality, it's proof that you're still alive in a world that constantly tries to make people go numb. You've been trained to second-guess your instincts, to apologize for your needs, to dilute your magic so that others could swallow it, but you are not a supplement to their comfort. You're not here to make them feel better about their limitations. You were never the broken one. You were the mirror. And they hated you for what you reflected. You showed them the truth they've buried, the pain they've ignored, the humanity they've suppressed. You made them uncomfortable, not because you were wrong, but because you were real. And real is terrifying to those who have lived their entire lives behind a mask. You were born with fire in your lungs and they told you to whisper. You were made of oceans and they told you to stay in shallow waters. You were created for something beyond acceptance. You were created to become, to unfold, to rise, even when no one claps for you, even when no one stays, even when you have to walk through hell alone. Because that's what it means to be misunderstood. It means walking a path that others are too afraid to take. It means holding your truth even when it costs you connection. It means becoming who you truly are, not in spite of the pain, but because of it. And yes, that's a heavy thing to carry, but it's also sacred, because the ones who make it through the fire don't come out the same. They come out forged, clearer, sharper, untouchable. And when the world finally sees you, really sees you, they won't be able to explain you. They'll call you intense, they'll call you complicated, but they'll feel it, that quiet power that only comes from someone who's been to the edge of themselves and didn't run. You don't owe anyone a softer version of your truth. You don't need to be more relatable to be real. You don't need to be fixed to be whole. You just need to be what you are. Unedited, unfiltered, unapologetic, because the privilege of a lifetime isn't to be loved by everyone. It's to become who you truly are and love yourself so deeply that no one else's misunderstanding can rewrite your worth. Want me to continue with another segment? So stop waiting for them to get it. Stop hoping for permission. Your existence doesn't need validation, it demands recognition. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are not a mistake. You are a rare frequency, a code not easily cracked, an intensity that refuses to be dimmed. Own that. Let them misunderstand. Let them mislabel. Because your power lies in what they don't see coming. You are the quiet storm, the burning question, the answer that doesn't fit their narrative. And the moment you stop trying to be understood is the moment you finally start to feel whole.